little bit of a harsh mic here. I hope this isn't too abrasive on the ears out in the audience.
We're often in a harsh light.
My name is James Golson. I am the Education Policy Analyst here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And we've got a great panel here today, three men who know this area very well. Very detailed presentations for you guys, so I want to keep my opening remarks as brief as possible to give them as much time as we can. Just a couple of things I want the audience to think about for the duration of this presentation to kind of frame the argument here in terms of school funding. From 1999 to 2009, Texas school districts increased their funding from around, or increased their spending, from around $28 billion to $54 billion in a 10-year period. That's about a 95% increase. That is against a 19.7% increase in student enrollment growth over that same time period, and comes out to, per the Comptroller's FAST report, around a $4,000 per student increase in spending for the same time period. During that decade and prior to that even, we've seen administrative salaries rise at a higher rate than that of teachers. And at the same time, we've seen administrators tell us that their school districts are burdened by unfunded mandates from the state level. And now, the environment that finds us in is that we have four different lawsuits filed against the state to address the school funding formula and the problems within, and that's from both property wealthy and property poor school districts, saying the funding formula is inadequate, it is unfair, it basically doesn't address the needs of really any of our Texas students. So, in short, what I think is it is time to rethink how we fund our schools, specifically with an eye toward what Texas is constitutionally obligated to provide for our K-12 students, which is an efficient system for diffusion of knowledge, an efficient system of public education. And so with that in mind, I'd like to turn things over to the panel. Our first presenter will be David Thompson. David comes to us from the Gulf Coast area. He's, as his bio says, a former member of the Board of Directors for the NSBA Council of School Attorneys. And he serves as a legislative counsel for the Texas Association of School Administrators. Mr. Thompson, please.
Well, good morning, and Happy New Year to everyone. I hope your year's off to a good start, and I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be with you today. I want to start this conversation by, first of all, saying something that may sound a little odd for somebody who has recently filed litigation against the state of Texas. I am a real fan, and Rob Eisler knows this. He and I have known each other for many years, of our legislature and how we approach government in Texas. I am a fan of a citizen legislature. I've worked closely with our legislature for many years. I know how hard our members work in a very intense period, the long hours, the early mornings and the late nights that go into it. And I want to say this up front. The fact that we still have significant problems and difficulties that I believe rise to the level of constitutional infirmities with how we fund schools in Texas is not an indication of lack of effort. It's a problem we've worked hard on for years. It's a problem we're going to continue to work on in coming years. But I want to start by just asking all of you a question. And don't look at your neighbor. Give me an honest reaction. How many of you at home have at least a two-car garage? Right now, today, if you went home, how many of you could get two cars in your garage? How many of you made a New Year's resolution to lose weight and exercise more? How many of you have already broken that resolution? We all have difficult, big, hard tasks that tend to get put off a little bit and that we don't tend to address till we have to. I think this falls into one of those categories. We're going to talk about money and funding, but I want to start first. Before we jump into the dollars, I think it's always appropriate to talk about our kids and take a few minutes and really reflect on the dramatic changing demographics in Texas. What we are seeing in our schools today is the future of Texas. And I want you to look just quickly at this. And these are simply the years, the changes in our school funding system since the last Supreme Court decision and the last significant revision of our school funding system by the Texas legislature. You'll know that we are growing at roughly 85,000 students a year. We're adding a school district nearly the size of Fort Worth ISD every year to the state of Texas. And I also want you to note the changing demographics within that population. Sometime this year, by the way, sometime during this school year, we will top 5 million children in our schools, and a majority of the kids in our schools are now Hispanic. During the same time period, I also want you to note the number of our kids who are coming out of low-income homes, the number of our kids who qualify for and receive free and reduced price lunch. Now, the number of kids who are eligible is actually closer to 60%. But in last school year, in 2010-11, for the first time in history, over half of our children actually applied for and received free and reduced price lunch in our schools. And here's another way of looking at it. You'll see the percentage of our children who actually come from economically disadvantaged homes is right at 59% and increasing. Either this year or next year will top 60%. So, to start, before we talk about anything else relating to funding, we have to keep in mind Texas is a dynamic, growing state, and that's good. I would much rather be a growing state than a state losing population. We're growing in our student population. We're adding 85,000 kids a year. We're simultaneously a changing student population. Our kids are becoming more needy. And what is the third thing we're doing at the same time? In fact, this school year is the first year that we're phasing it in. We are raising standards. We are raising standards more than at any time in the history of the state of Texas. This year's 9th grade class will be the first class that to graduate from high school has to pass all of the end-of-course exams, has to meet our new post-secondary readiness requirements for graduation. Those are high standards. I think that's good. Texas gets good marks for our standards nationally. And we're doing all of that at the same time. So we have a growing, changing population and increasing standards. That's the context in which we are approaching school funding. And I want to say a word about the standards, because I think some people go, oh, yeah, okay, we're raising standards. Have any of you looked at the release test items on any of the new end-of-course exams? Vaughn, I know you have. A few of you have. If you haven't, you need to do that. I'm going to make a statement here that will probably surprise you. This looks like a pretty bright audience. A majority of you would not graduate from high school under the new standards. A majority of the people in this room could not meet the graduation requirements without remediation that we're putting in place for every student in high school. Rob and I had this conversation during the session. A majority of the legislature could not graduate from high school under the standards that we're putting in place without remediation. Justice Brister, a majority of the judges and a majority of the lawyers in the state could not graduate from high school without remediation under the new standards that we're putting in place. So we're raising standards for a growing and more needy population. Now, just very quickly, looking nationally, if you look at national surveys, overwhelmingly the problem that is identified as the single biggest issue in schools, nothing else is even in double digits, is funding. Studies at the state level, surveys as recently as last summer at the state level show overwhelmingly, when you survey the whole population in the state of Texas, both all adults and parents of school children support funding for public education. Do not believe public education was made a priority in the most recent session, and the percentage of parents who think the cuts that were made this last session were appropriate actually is the percentage of people who could accidentally check the wrong box. Statistically insignificant. There's been a lot of question about what were the cuts. There are some people who think cuts didn't get made this last session. I am publicly inviting anybody who doesn't think cuts were made to take the Algebra 1 end-of-course exam this coming spring, because your math skills are in question. Total cuts were $4 billion to the foundation school program, $1.3 to $1.4 in other categorical programs, for a total cut of about $5.3 to $5.4 billion over this biennium. What that translates into is a reduction over this biennium, and keep in mind with the growing population, of a little over $500 per student per year. That's the average across the state. Obviously, some districts it was a little more, some districts it was a little less. Now, very quickly, when we talk about school funding and litigation, the reality is this is sort of a call response. It's a back and forth pattern that is frankly part of the way we've done business in Texas for the last 30 or 35 years. I am representing most recently the group of districts that are plaintiffs in the new school finance suit. It is the largest group that has ever participated in any school finance litigation in Texas. We have right at 1.6 million children and growing. In this current litigation, well over half the districts in the state are already involved. Over 2/3 of the children in the state are now involved in this litigation, and it will continue to grow. I just want you to notice, again, this call response pattern. Basically, every significant revision that we've had to our school funding system going back to the 70s has been a result of this call response pattern between the legislative and executive branches and the judiciary. And if you go back to the early 1980s, really over about the last 30 years, our Supreme Court has written extensively on at least 6 previous times about school finance litigation. Cases have gotten to the Supreme Court. The state has won once. That's been true over a multi-decade period. It has been independent of who's been on the court, and I think we have some pretty strong precedents and very consistent language from our court over an extended period of time. But that's just a pattern I want you to note. It's kind of like, again, cleaning out your garage. Virtually every significant revision to our school funding system has been as a result of a Supreme Court decision. And by the way, almost every significant revision has occurred in special session, not during regular session. So what are the issues this time around? Others on our panel will speak to it. This language from our Texas Constitution has been unchanged since ratified by Texas voters in 1876. It is language unlike any other language you will find in our Texas Constitution. And it's a very Jeffersonian phrase. In fact, the origin of this section of our Constitution actually can be traced back to a resolution that Thomas Jefferson introduced in the Virginia House of Delegates over a decade prior to the American Revolution. But this notion that an educated citizenry and a healthy democratic society are related is foundational. We've always believed that in Texas, and hopefully we still believe it. I want you to look at the first phrase, a general diffusion of knowledge being essential to the preservation of the liberties and rights of the people. Stop right there. That is the reason that we have a public school system, and why our state has always supported, going back again into the 1800s, schools. That relationship between the liberties and rights of the people and an educated citizenry. That's the why. Everything after it is the how. Everything after it isn't the why. Everything after it is simply how we meet that great constitutional objective. You'll note the next language, it is a duty. It's not something we hope we get around to. It is a duty of the legislature, and again, you do not find that language elsewhere in our Constitution, to establish and make suitable provision for the support and maintenance of an efficient system of public free schools. And then, of course, in Texas, we have a provision that is relatively unusual compared to other states. Article 8, Section 1E, a prohibition on a state property tax. It is our Supreme Court has noted for many years, going back into the mid-90s. In fact, Justice Cornyn, now Senator Cornyn, wrote extensively on it. We can do indirectly what we're prohibited from doing directly. Over-relying on a local property tax to the point where the local tax operates as if it's being controlled and levied by the state can violate this provision. And our court has recognized that again for going on 2 decades. So what we have, if you look at our Constitution, in simple terms, we have a must, a may, and a may not. The state must provide an adequate and equalized system that provides for a general diffusion of knowledge and that allows districts to meet state curriculum assessment and other legal requirements. That's language out of multiple Supreme Court opinions. That's a must. That's the duty. The state may rely in part on local property taxes as one means to fulfill that duty. The state may not rely so heavily on local property taxes that the local tax operates as if it were a state property tax. So, again, some brief language from Supreme Court opinions. Again, the prohibition on a state property tax turns on the state's control over the local property tax. The key phrase that has been used in multiple opinions is meaningful discretion. Do local districts and communities have meaningful discretion over their own local revenues, or are they simply being used as a mechanism by the state to meet state obligations and state requirements? Adequacy. Now, when we talk about adequacy in Texas, we've never asked the Supreme Court to simply reach into the sky and create its own standard of what is enough. I want you to go back to the constitutional phrase of general diffusion of knowledge. The legislature, as a policy matter, gets to define how much is enough. And that is a dynamic standard that changes over time as our society changes. That is a policy question. There's a floor. Frankly, we're so far above the floor that I don't really view that as the issue. We have high standards in Texas. But what we have also got in Texas is this notion that the standards have to be linked to a funding system that actually allows you to meet your own requirements. That's our concept of adequacy. How many of you have ever built a house? Anybody ever built a house? Tamara and I have built 2, and we've remodeled 2 and we've built 1, and we're still speaking to each other. The fun part is the design phase. Getting to decide how big the house is, what does it look like, what do the rooms look like, what's the functionality, what are the trim levels. Then the day comes that you have to sit down with the guy that's going to actually build the house and ask one really important question. Does my budget match my plans? Do those 2 things match up? If they don't, you have a problem. That's what we're talking about when we talk about adequacy in Texas. Do these high standards that we've set match up with a funding system that will actually support those standards? Now, the answer to that question in Texas, the honest answer has to be, we don't know. Because we've spent a decade very diligently refusing to do any studies of the cost of our own requirements. The Legislative Budget Board and other entities used to do studies. Guess what the state's own studies kept showing? State's own studies kept showing, and using a variety of mechanisms, the state's own studies kept showing if we're going to raise standards for a growing population, it's going to take some resources. So what was our solution to that? We just quit doing studies. So the honest truth is we don't know today in Texas what the cost of our own requirements are. Efficiency. The Constitution uses the word efficiency, and our Supreme Court has spoken to this, and they've said there are different definitions of efficiency. One is certainly don't be wasteful. Use your money productively. It's kind of what that would be sort of a qualitative definition of efficiency, to use our court's terms. We also have a quantitative concept of efficiency, and that's where this notion of equity comes in. It doesn't have to be perfect. Substantially equal access to revenue for similarly situated districts at similar tax rates. Because it's a state duty, there has to be some degree of equity. Suitability, remember that's a phrase from our Constitution. We have to structure, operate, and fund a system so that it'll actually accomplish what it is we're setting out to do. System can't be arbitrary. Has to make sense on some level. Has to be intelligible. I know there are many staff people, many members here in the audience. Is there anybody here who could go home and give a 20-minute speech to your Rotary Club and actually explain how the Texas public school finance system operates? There are a lot of bright people in this room. Here's my last question. And this is just a point spread of funding levels for current districts. Is this our school finance system, or is this? One of these is a Jackson Pollock painting. The other one isn't. I'll let you decide which is which. So we will go through the process again. I have high degree of confidence that we will eventually reach the Supreme Court again. I believe our system will be found unconstitutional again. And we will find ourselves where we have in the past, and that is back working with the executive and legislative branches to try to make the changes to meet the high expectations, the clear expectations of our own state constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. If y'all will give me 1 minute to get out of the PowerPoint presentations here. Sorry about this.
I like pictures.
Okay, our next panelist is Justice Scott Brister. He served over 20 years as a judge at various levels in Texas, but most recently as a justice on the Supreme Court, and was sitting on that very court during the 2005 West Orange Cove school finance litigation. Justice Brister.
You got the clicker? Can I do it from here?
Yes, absolutely.
Do that. Thank you. David covered some of this, so I'll go through the first part a little fast. First of all, let me put it in context. This happens everywhere. Everybody's got school finance lawsuits. There's only the 3 or 4 states that have not had them. The yellow ones are where the school finance plaintiffs have won. The purple ones are where they have not. There's been mixed. There's been states like Texas where there's been a bunch. Interestingly, in several of the purple states, the courts just threw up their hands and said, we don't entertain this. This is a political question. This is not a legal question. We're not going to get into school financing at all. I think after this is now the 7th round of school lawsuits, there may be some judges in Texas thinking, gosh, that would have been a good idea to have done it that way. But we're a long way past that. And it's interesting to note here, these don't follow the usual red and blue state patterns. It's quite a mix. The plaintiffs win in plenty of red states and lose in several blue states. So it's a little bit different than politics as you would just expect it. Almost all the school finance lawsuits start here. They don't have to. Texas rules, you can file a lawsuit and try it anywhere as long as nobody objects. But statewide officials have a right to be sued in Travis County if they insist, and so almost all the cases have been filed in Travis County. They're usually brought against the Commissioner of Education. Is that?
And the comptroller. Those two are typically the defendants.
And so they're almost always tried in Travis County, and that makes a difference, of course, because Travis County is Democratic, all the judges are Democratic. The trial judges in Travis County are very bright. Steve Yelenosky, Judge Dietz, I mean, these are smart people, hardworking. good judges. But, you know, I mean, the fact of the matter is you're making fact-finding in these cases. These cases aren't tried to a jury. The judge is going to make fact findings. And if the question is, should a government agency get more money, there's going to be a tendency for Democrats to say yes more often and Republicans to say no. And these fact findings in these cases are important. They're, generally speaking, the rule is Texas Supreme Court, appellate courts don't make fact findings, only the trial judge does, so you're stuck with the fact findings unless they're clearly wrong, unless they're just flat wrong. So it makes a difference that these cases are tried and the initial fact findings are made in Travis County. They end up here, my old shop, at the Texas Supreme Court. This is the seventh round of lawsuits. David mentioned all of these. It is interesting to note the court became majority Republican in January of 95. It was majority Democrat before then. That may or may not have something to do with the court seemed to back off for a while, issued threatening opinions, but refused to declare anything unconstitutional. But then 2005 carried through on those threats and declared the existing system unconstitutional. This is the current court. There have been 3 changes since the last opinion in 2005, so you wouldn't expect any huge changes in the views of the judges. It's very difficult for judges to say, well, I'm just wrong. And interestingly enough, lots of them that do that, like Judge O'Connor, maybe on a judicial selection, they tend to do it after they're not a judge anymore, so it doesn't matter. But Justice Guzman on the left replaced me. Justice Lehrman on the right replaced Harriet O'Neill. Judge Don Willis has been on the court since before then, but he had been at the Attorney General's office while the 2005 case was being prepared, so he didn't participate. So those will be the only 3 new people. So you wouldn't expect with that limited change in personnel that there'd be big changes this year. As David mentioned, the Education Clause is a very old one. This is the first Constitution, 1845, when Texas joined the Union, became a state. It existed there. There have been a few changes since then. Of course, our Constitution current Constitution we've had since 1876. The Reconstruction Constitution shortly after Reconstruction ended. There are a few changes in that. They dropped liberties and rights and liberties and made liberties and rights. I have no idea why you would do that. They changed legislature to capital L legislature. Those of you that are in the legislature, when we're talking about the capital L legislature, we're not talking about anyone except the one at 11th in Congress. Make suitable provision, have to establish and to make it suitable. And the most important change in 1876 was they added this word efficient. And that is unusual. If you're thinking, what do I really want in a school? I mean, if you ask me, what do you really want your schools to efficient is not the first word that would come to mind. But it must have meant something, and the court has addressed it several times and said, basically, well, it means, as far as we can tell, it means efficient. Same thing it always means. And so that's what we're going to do with it. So as David mentioned, there's 3 main clauses in here that have been involved in the litigation. Adequacy is based on the general diffusion. And say, well, that's enough to participate fully in economic, political life. And as David said, the judges are not going to feel good about saying when is an adequate education. I think it's very difficult to say. I mean, public school system in Texas, a lot of kids graduate from it and go to Harvard, Yale, Rice, Stanford, everywhere else. It's real hard to say, well, just the whole system is inadequate. The courts basically said, if no teaching has taken place, yes, there is a point where we'd say it's inadequate, but it's so low that we're not really. This has never been the basis of any case. It's been claimed in all the cases, I think, but it's never been the basis that the courts. And it's just something that's going to make judges uneasy. As David mentioned, the court recently said, well, legislatures defined it as taking the TOX test or whatever your current acronym for the assessment tests are, but most kids are passing that, and so it must be adequate because it's meeting that standard. So that will again be litigated in these cases, but again, I'd be surprised if the court feels comfortable deciding on that basis. Suitability, the courts, everybody kind of assumed this meant the same thing as adequacy, and the court said, no. Even though that's exactly what the court had said earlier, and then no, suitability is different. And then they said, well, it means the means reach the end, and Judge Heck gave an explanation, and I still don't understand it. I think it means the same thing. It's never been the basis for, and I'd be surprised if it is here again. The ones that do make a difference are the efficiency arguments, that it's got to be an efficient system. Well, what does that mean? Well, the court said that means everybody's got to get equal funds, equal revenues for equal tax rate. Now, stop just a second. Is that how you would define efficiency? That would be how you would define an efficient welfare system, where for the equal effort of trying, everybody gets the same money. That is not how anybody in any other area would define efficiency. Efficiency is you give the most money to the people that are making the most, that are doing the most. Who do you give the most money to? The ones that are cutting costs, making the most money, being the most productive, and having the highest profits. That is not, I think the court I argued the court unsuccessfully, had absolutely nobody else join me on this, but I said that makes no sense. But I think anybody frankly making that argument, you're going to have about as much luck as I did. Once judges have said something 6 times, they're not going to change it later. So we are stuck, as far as financing, with this definition of efficiency, even though it's wrong. And that is that, if you're trying as hard as everybody else, you get as much money as everybody else, regardless of what your results are. And that's my complaint about efficiency. But but that's going to be the test. If everybody tries, if your school district is trying as hard as the next school district, you ought to have as much money to play with. This is the other big one. As David mentioned, the no statewide property tax rule. And the concept of there, he mentioned that there is no state property tax on the books. But there is this cap, and the deal is if you tell the school districts you got to do all of this stuff, and to do that stuff they have to cap, everybody is forced to tax up to the cap, then the effect is a statewide property tax, even though we haven't mandated a statewide property tax. That's the idea. The question, of course, is that if you look at the evidence, you have to ask yourself, are the school districts really forced to do all these things? I mean, think about it. Does a school district have to have an administration building? There's the internet. A lot of people don't have offices. All of them do. Do school districts have to have an administration building? Do they have to build swimming pools? This is a anecdote. Just burned me up when I lived in Tomball right outside of Houston. Tomball built a beautiful swimming pool. I paid taxes for it. School district built a pool. And when I called up to find out public hours, they said, there are no public hours. You are not admitted. Now, that isn't right. Why do I have to pay for a pool that I can't go into? I don't mind if the schools have the first bid and all this other, but are these the people that should build our football stadiums and tennis courts and and all these other things? I raise that question: are schools really forced to do that? The response from the schools is, we have to do this because we want to keep kids. I don't have any problem with having school swimming programs. I think it's a great idea, but I question whether you're forced to do the argument that this is statewide property, we're forced to do that if it's something you just want to do. Some of the alternatives, I just want to suggest a few things first, discuss about some of these suggested in my dissenting opinion. The court's real big. The court has suggested several times that they'd love for some of Texas has over 1,000 school districts. What you ought to do is consolidate some of these things. Nobody's interested in that because no people want their school district to disappear. Everybody, when you say consolidation, they think that means we're not going to have Yellow Jacket football anymore. We're not going to have our high school. We're not talking about closing a school. We're talking about closing the district, putting the districts together. The problem is, here's Bexar County, for instance. Edgewood filed, been a plaintiff in all these lawsuits. Edgewood's a district in southeast central San Antonio. If you drive around Loop 410 in San Antonio, you go through 12 school districts. 12 school districts. Now, folks, if you take all of that's central San Antonio. If you take San Antonio and divide it up into 12 pie shapes, somebody's going to get stuck with no property, and that's Edgewood. They're right next door to downtown San Antonio, where there's a lot of property. But, God forbid we should put those two school districts together and take care of the property inequity problem because, this is our school district and we want to keep it. So this is one of those things where the court says, here's a great idea, and all the legislators say, yeah, great, Great if you don't have to run in my district. Accountability. The problem with the Robin Hood plan, which is what we currently have, where if you've got too much property, you raise the tax and you send the money somewhere else. And if people, of course, are more careful. I am certain that the figures David showed you of people, how many people think the school should have more money? Everybody says yes. Now, turn the question around and you'll get exactly the same figures when you say, how many people think you should pay for it? Everybody says no. I mean, how many of those people are going to say, all right, if you ask the question, how many people think school should have more money and you're willing to pay for it? The answer is going to be 4% yes, and everybody else is going to say no, because this is a problem for, as you know, for all Americans. I want the best health care in the world, and I don't want it to cost more anymore than a $10 copay. I want the best schools in the world, and I want my taxes to be lower. And none of us, if we're running for office, can tell the people, no, you can't have that, because you will not get elected. You have to tell them, yeah, sure, you can have more stuff and cost less. And that's exactly what they want. But the problem is, if you're not accountable, if this money's coming from somewhere else, it's not the same as raising it from your own people, when people are going to look at their tax bill and say, what am I getting for this? Competition is the only way you get more for less. Competition is how we define efficiency in a free market economy, because what it does is we get rid of deadwood, and make no mistake about it, efficiency is a harsh principle. It means people get fired. It means people have to leave their family and go to the city to work, because that's where the jobs are, and all these other things. They require hard choices. People hate it. But that's how you get more for less. And that's the only way you get more for less. As I suggested, the problem is all of these cases are filed by school districts, and the school districts are never going to say, they're never going to ask the court, please close my school district and join it with somebody else and fire all the administrators. They're not going to ask that. And the court, somebody needs to ask that. The problem is, in all the cases so far, nobody has. And what judges do, if nobody raises an argument, they say, great argument, but nobody raised it, therefore we're not addressing it. And that's what's happened in all the school finance cases so far. Nobody's asked whether there's no more efficient way to use this money, because nobody who's been a plaintiff has been interested in that. That's the last thing they want. I'll close with, this is not just a random high school on the right. That's my high school, Ridgefield High School in Waco, Texas. It was closed in 1986. It was not closed for poor performance. Class ahead of me included Judge Priscilla Owen, now in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Class ahead of her included Judge Andy Hainan, federal judge in Brownsville, South Texas. My class included Justice Sarah Duncan, longtime judge on the Court of Appeals in San Antonio. And I dare say there's not a handful of high schools in Texas that graduated as many federal and appellate judges in 3 years as Ridgefield High School did. But it was put together merged with Waco High School, and I can't say whether that made the education better or the cost lower. But I can say it wasn't the end of the world. All of your constituents are telling you, God forbid we should change the drill team or close a school. It is not the end of the world to close a school. It won't make any difference. If you're educating the kids well, it won't affect them at all. The deal is, all of us, when we become public officials, we raise our right hand, we swear an oath to uphold the constitutional laws of this state. And what the Constitution of this state says is it's supposed to be an efficient system in the public schools. So I applaud everybody who's doing great things for the public schools. But the fact of the matter, if you're a public official and you're not working to make it more efficient, you're not fulfilling your oath of office. And on that lighthearted note, I'll pass it back to the
Which way is the clicker? Forward and back. Okay, so you have to teach me that.
I just got a lesson on how to use the clicker. I'll fill in while you're moving it over. But what I want to tell David Thompson about our ability to pass those end-of-course exams is, and I'm talking about the legislature now, is it's representative government. Now, come on. And we,
Well, this is Rob Eisler, and he is our final presenter today. He has been in the House for almost a decade now and is currently the chairman of the House Public Education Committee. Representative Eisler.
Yes, thank you, James. And by the way, they are fantastic presentations. And just talk about David Thompson quickly. We go back to my first year on the school board, and he was representing a case, and so I got to know him. And I knew I was in Texas politics when the case was about a cheerleader. Remember that?
I was representing you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. In fact, he referred to our board as cheerless leaders. And Judge, I love you. In fact, I want to finish with the judge's comment on one of the cases, and that was, someday the Texas school system must become efficient by 21st century standards. As that is what the Texas Constitution requires, we should start that process today. Thank you very much. No. Trying to fix school finance in the legislature is a very difficult procedure, opportunity, event. Tempers flare, and I'm looking right in line with Jimmy Don Aycock, who is outstanding, and in fact spent last interim reading the code about difference chapter 41 and 42, and he had about 6 different plans, and of course they were too good, so nobody considered them. And back there, Von Bayer with Senator Shapiro's office, who's been in on a lot of these solutions, and Courtney too. It takes that kind of team effort, and we, Florence and I, had been working for a long time together, and of course when it comes down to it, the Senate and the House had 2 different plans. So we had to spend time finding middle ground, and that's just what you can only do in the legislature. Because if you look at the legislators' responsibility, it's to represent their district, do what's best for them and for the state of Texas. And school district is usually the largest employer in these 1,041 school districts. 29. See how quickly it changes. Yes, consolidation. But the median size of our school districts is like 907. So half our school districts the top 10 school districts have about 1 million kids. And then the bottom half has less than 1,000 each. Now that should give you an idea of the scope of the challenge. It's not a problem. Anyway, changing the funding is difficult, okay? So if we look at, oh yeah, I have this. Hey, I'm in charge. If you look at where are we, okay? Facts are stubborn things, whatever our wishes may be, our inclinations, you can't change the facts. And that's been part of the challenge. What are the facts? Where is the money? How is it spent? How do we, yes, we've needed court orders in the legislature to fix school finance, and if you talk to Mr. Anderson over at TEA, he likens it to the mousetrap game. Remember Rube Goldberg? That's usually how the school finance system will work. And then if you need to fix something, it takes an equally complicated fix. And you only know how the fix works if you were in the legislature at the time. So we are rife with that. And I want to hopefully simplify some of that for you today. Okay? And to add to the judge, we talk about efficiency and we talk about general diffusion of knowledge, but efficiency really, you could say, is just cheapness. You just don't want to spend any money. Well, I like to look at it better as a definition of productivity. It's who gets the most achievement per dollar spent. And what's not up there is something Albert Einstein said was, no, it's not doing the same thing over and over again. We've used that too. But if I had an hour to save the world, I would spend 59 minutes defining the problem and 1 minute finding solutions. And that's true. A problem properly described is half solved. And we just haven't encompassed all that. What is the legislative or political will? And that is often to get reelected. And so it's, a lot of plans depend on the runs. And that goes beyond medicine, too. And that is, how much more money is my school district going to get? Okay? Oh, well, they're going to get more money. Well, then I'll vote for that. And that's often been the case. It reminds me of this simplified 1040 form. Have you seen that? 2 lines. First line, how much did you make? Second line, send it in. And that's what happens with school finance. Hey, and we bragged about that. I can tell I'm going to go over my time. Ooh. We bragged about that when we had that $10 billion shortfall in 2003. Yeah, we didn't raise taxes, we cut. But you know what? We provided $1.2 billion of additional money for our public education. And nobody knew or talked about that the fund balances, the undesignated fund balances for school districts after that biennium went up $1.2 billion. Okay? But we provided it, right? We're heroes. So you're right, gentlemen. We need to be looking at productivity. We need to find out who's doing the best with the money they get. We need to keep the playing field level. And the original reason for public education was cited very well by Mr. Thompson, and that was educated citizens will embrace and continue democracy. Because what? We're one generation from losing it. And there may be some that say we're 4 years from losing it. You know? Thank you, Bill. But that's what happens. Now, student enrollment, and I'll run through these just because, over 13 years, you look through the 9-10 school year, enrollment has grown at an annual rate of about 2%. By the way, and we will break 5 million, 1 in every 10 American school children is a Texan. That's a challenge. And Texas is a focal point just because we're addressing that. And we have a very diverse student population, which we can be proud of. There's a lot of good things about it. Inflation has been up and down, as you see. U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, as well as the Consumer Price Index, have shown that we average about 2.6%. Okay? Now, here you go. And remember, this is the cake mix approach, right? Just add money. Thank you, John. And that's what we've done. Well, we've got a court case. We've got to fix this. We've got to fix this. So if we add more money, it doesn't matter if it's adequacy or equity. If we add more money, then the people at the bottom will get more, but then so will everybody in the middle and the top. So how's that working for us? Okay? Over the 13 years, this shows you each year, if we just increased funding, and I'll explain this rather than go through it, increase funding by inflation and enrollment growth, we wouldn't have any of the red bars. It would just be dark. So what that chart shows you is each year that we've spent above inflation and enrollment growth over the last 13 years for a cumulative $61 billion above inflation and enrollment growth over the base year. Okay? So everybody agrees that putting more money into our schools makes them better. No. But the easy political solution is they put more money into it. That's coming to the head, okay? And that's why we have been endeavoring to look at efficiency and now productivity. Why? Because forever the legislature has been supplementing school funding, has been supplementing what we've been... But as you can see, the numbers start to get... in my mind it was $52 billion. James said $54 billion. That's $1 billion a week without taking the summer off. Right? $143 million a day. That's a lot of money. Can we continue to do that on that graph? Can we? Well, there's some that think we should. There's some that think we don't have education as a priority. We actually, yes, we cut from the FSP or expectation $2 billion a year. And if you just went from inflation and enrollment growth, we're still $3.3 billion above inflation and enrollment growth, even with the $2 billion reduction. And the percentage went from 58% of the budget to about 60% of the budget. So yes, it's a priority. And yes, its priority is not to raise taxes, but priority is productivity. Foundation school program revenues, you can see over since 1990, basically, they went up about 31%, and inflation enrollment growth 14.4%. So we've been 16.5% above inflation and enrollment growth. So there's been no shortage of money, no shortage of effort, okay, and no shortage of lawsuits. So we're all happy up here, aren't we? A big item, again, see, that's why it's a big slide. It's a big item. Cost of education index. Most people don't follow it, okay? And that's because we have not adjusted or changed it since when, Vaughn? 80 or 91? Yeah, it was late 80s, early 90s. Okay, I thought it was 8. All right, let's add. Okay, that was 1990, plus or minus a year. Okay, the basic allotment for each district is adjusted to reflect the geographic variations in known resource costs. This was the factor that we would fix each allotment to correct for cost. Oh, man, I knew I was going to go over. The basic allotment for costs that school districts could not handle. Now, look at this. By competitive salary, if you look, you get the index 1.09 if you're paying $20,851 per year per teacher above. What's the average teacher pay in Texas? $48.6 thousand. And the starting salary is about double that 20,000. So you automatically get a great fix in your cost of education index. If your county population is less than 40, you add on. If you're rural or urban, et cetera, okay, low income. And I think about 10 years ago, TEA multiplied this factor by 0.71 to squeeze out all the other factors. And I'm going to have to run through the rest of this because now we're getting into it. Okay. This is our average teacher pay. The long story short is everybody, the cost of education index in Texas ranges from 1.0426 to 1.114, which means everybody's above average. Everybody gets a fix for, and if we just fix the cost of education index, we could save almost $3 billion a year if we funded them correctly. Okay, that's where adequacy and equity can be much easier to find. It has a predictive ability on teacher salaries. As an example, there are school districts for the last 30 years that have been getting the higher allotment because of an old factor that has enabled them to get about 30% more money for 30 years. Is their teacher pay commensurate with that? No, they just hire more teachers. The student-teacher ratio in Texas overall is 14.6 to 1, I believe. In rural Texas, it's closer to 10 to 1. And in the United States, if we added one student per classroom, we'd save $12 billion annually, which is about what the feds give the states in. And in Texas, that's $1.088 billion per year, one student. So you can see just the cost of education index. I was at that Tribune Fest, and they asked if you could fix one thing in school finance. That would be it, because it's the first factor. It's the first adjustment to the 4765 basic allotment that went up from 3218 2 years ago in House Bill 3646. See, you had to be there, and then you understand that. Okay. And this, again, if we look at the largest school districts in Texas, this is, and David, you showed this, but if you level the field by correcting for demographics or poverty and local costs, that's what it looks like. Okay, does that look fair and equitable? No. How's Texas doing?
Can I use this slide?
Sure. As long as you help us with the fix. Our fix will be different from yours, but hey, that's what the process is for. And if you want to see where Texas is, look at the bottom, and you want to go to the lower left. Being number one is the lower left. That's why. Texas, in academics, corrected for demographics, and this was in a quality count survey, which looked at 4 things, and that was parental education, parental employment, language ability, and family income. Texas ranked 49th because Texas has the second most difficult to educate students. New Mexico is the only one, the only state below us. But we also get the most out of it, and that's why we are corrected for demographics, number 1 academic achievement, number 1. Now, in finance, which is corrected for local costs and spending per student, we're 31. So you can see we're below the national average, meaning we spend more than the average. Okay? And New Mexico is in the 3-4 box, which means they are below average in achievement, corrected for demographics, and they spend more for their local costs. And again, I can't take longer on this. Anyway, but the key to all this is let's get a diffusion of knowledge to the legislature too, so that we can make informed decisions. And we can highlight the school districts that are making progress and spending less. We have a $5,000 per student range from the most efficient to the least efficient in the top 200 school districts, which comprise 91% of the kids. So, like they say at the barbecue, I'm done.
Thank you, Representative Eisler. We've got time for a Q&A. If any of you have questions, right there.
Miss Texas.
Well, I have first want to reassure everybody in the room, particularly all the legislators here, that since you've been invited to take the STAR tests, don't worry. The superintendents have your back, and so does TEA. They may be really, really hard questions, but you'll only have to get 15% of them right to pass the test, so don't worry. But that having been said, here's the question I've always had about school finance, and I was going to throw this out and see what you all had to say about it. One of the things I've noticed about the school finance system is we have a lot of incentives in the system, particularly administratively, to spend money. Prior to 2006, where we put the rollback provisions in there, used to be you had a very powerful incentive to raise property tax rates. And, if you are a smaller district, we give you an extra allotment. If you put a lot of students into special education, we give you an extra allotment. We have a lot of extra allotments in there that encourage kind of top-heavy structures, and admittedly we have some federal mandates that do that too, that encourage some top-heavy structures in our school districts. And what I'm wondering is, are there ways we can address that? Because Susan Combs did some very interesting work taking a look at who gets good performance while spending less money, who gets the best kind of value for money, and are there ways we can look at that in the school finance context where we can try to find some way to reward, maybe we give them a lower base tax rate or something like that, but find a way to reward school districts that get good academic performance while at the same time not having one non-teacher for every teacher in the classroom.
It's funny, you want school districts to save money, but what you want to do is give them money for saving money. What school districts will kill for is great recognition. You see it on their buildings. Every realtor knows the ratings of all the schools, and they parade that. And I've been trying to think of what is the incentive to do that. And you're absolutely right. If you look at some of the weights, you've got career and technical, 1.35. You've got comp ed 0.2. So you can add those up, and special ed I think is an average of 2 point something, because you have different ones. I know, for example, a pregnant student is 2.41. And I wondered where they got the extra 0.41. But but just as you saw in that index, that the high salary was $20,000. Does that seem out of date to you? And yes, you're right, that needs to be updated. And the incentives are already there. But you're right, we need to look at that. And Jimmy Don is probably reading it right now.
Thank you. I noticed in Mr. Thompson's presentation that it says free public schools, and I think all of us know that public school is not free. Regardless of who you are, if you own anything, you pay taxes. And obviously it comes at a very high cost. So I know, I'm not sure what exactly the number is, and I don't know if anyone presented it of how much it costs per student in Texas. I know it's above the $10,000 mark. Is that correct?
Well, first of all, the word free in the Constitution means free to the student. And that was a radical idea at that time, that we're going to educate every child in our state, not just those who can afford it, to pay tuition. That's what the concept of free public education is about. Our total spending on public schools in Texas, we have to look at a couple of different factors. We use, and a lot of it depends on what the number is that you're dividing the total by. You can divide by enrollment. You can divide by average daily attendance, which is how many that show up on a day. Probably the best number to use, and Rob, I appreciated you using it in your slide, is weighted average daily attendance, which reflects the changing demographics of our state. If you use that number, our total spending per weighted student of state and local money is probably in the mid 5,000 range, 5,500, 53, 54. I know Dan Casey's here. Dan, is that somewhere in the right range? You have on top of that funding for facilities. And remember, when we talk about equalizing school funding, we're talking about operating costs, not. We have some state support for facilities, but most of that is paid out of local property taxes. That probably runs another $1,000 per student, give or take. And then we have an increase. We've had an increase in the past of federal funds. Those tend to be targeted. Remember that federal funds, first of all, we can't supplant our own state and local support, and we don't get to reuse the federal. Most of the federal money isn't general purpose money. It's for special education, or it's for Title I kids, or a big chunk of it that comes through the Department of Agriculture is for lunchroom programs. So you've got a big chunk of that money, and then you have a relatively small amount that's non-revenue sources.
Sure, go ahead.
Obviously, in the numbers that you presented from 2006 to 2011, the only demographic that didn't reduce was the Hispanic population. Correct. And so, and I know that our beloved William Wayne Justice is the federal judge that determined that we educate anyone that's in Texas, regardless of their citizenship.
Actually, Supreme Court determined that. Yeah.
So that's our demographic. If you know that that's the elephant in the living room, are you saying U.S. Supreme Court?
U.S. Supreme Court
determined that?
Yep. It was a federal trial court decision in early 80s for the trial court, and then was affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Okay. So that's the huge explosion in expense. And obviously, a lot of people who are not feeding into the program. I know for a fact that 2 houses down from me, and I'm talking about a large house, that has 2 physicians as the parents. They are foreign born. They have 3 children. The school district didn't even ask, do you want free lunch? Their 3 children get free lunch every morning, and they obviously have good incomes. So are we looking at, why are we just providing free lunch? I mean, it's the same thing as free school. Somebody's paying for it, to people that obviously are able to afford it. And why are we not trying to fix that problem?
Most districts in the state make free and reduced price lunch or breakfast available on, the many districts actually, you qualify for it based on your income. You actually have to fill out forms and prove your family economic status in order to qualify for it. A few districts, and it's actually the small number of districts, the number of kids in your community that qualify is such a high percentage that it's actually more efficient simply to make it available to everybody as opposed to trying to keep track of those who qualify and those that don't. That's actually the small number of campuses and districts. Most districts, it actually, there's an income qualification for free and reduced price lunch and breakfast. Right.
Hi, I'm Jamie Story with the Citizen Leader Alliance, previously with TPPF. I apologize because my eyes were kind of glazing over during some of it, so I apologize if I missed this. But I was just wondering quickly
You
if
told us
any
that
of
we
you...
were boring, and now you want us to help you?
That's what she said.
Yeah.
Not boring, just complex.
She said it very nicely.
You did say it nicely, Jamie.
Could you all just please answer the question that's the title of the presentation, which is how much is enough?
How about how high is up?
Well, it's like, I think it was over in the ERCOT session before this one, and that's like asking, well, what's the right price for electricity? And the answer is nobody in the legislature or the courts or any administrative body or school board can tell you the answer to that. That's why we have markets. Markets find the price. The problem is when government gets in and tells you, student, are going to this school and you cannot go anywhere else, we don't have a market. There's a million things you could do. One of my favorites is at UT, classes can't be bigger than, how many students?
UT?
No, at public school, public high school.
Well, there's no limit at the high school. The limit at the high school level is the size of the class, basically.
Right.
I mean, we have a lot of classes that are mid-30s or even 40 students
Why
this year because of
if you've got a good teacher at a high school, why shouldn't you have 200 in that class? Put 3 times the number of students and pay the teacher, who's a good teacher, twice as much money. You save money and the kids learn better. Now, why shouldn't you do that? That's what they do at UT. That's what they do. Now, let me hasten to say, you've got to have somebody on the ground who's deciding who's the good students, who the good teachers are and aren't. I mean, at Harvard Law School, 50% of my professors were competent. 10% were outstanding. 40% were pitiful. I'll say that to their face. They were pitiful teachers. They may have been twice as smart as me and could write better than me. They were pitiful teachers. Some of them are famous, and they're still pitiful teachers. But people, smart, you can go sit in a class, can tell whether this is interesting or this is boring. And why don't schools do that? I teach homeschool class to government kids, government class to homeschool kids in the Austin area. I would not be allowed to do that in public school. I do it for basically free because I like government and I like PowerPoints and pictures and and all government textbooks are boring, and so I can at least be more interesting than that. Why don't we have people who there's people that like to teach. I like to teach. I would do it. I'm board certified to teach in Texas. I didn't do it because I couldn't support a family on it. And all my family's teachers, and I have great sympathy for teachers who need more salary to support their families. But the answer to that is, so what can you bring to the table to make it cost effective? Well, I could teach a big class. I could teach 1,000 kids government in 4 hours once a week. I could do it, and it wouldn't hardly cost you much at all.
Can I respond to the question, how much is enough? What are you trying to accomplish? What are our standards? What is the level of performance that the state has set for all students? And the honest answer is we don't know the cost. All of the studies that have been done in the past, including FAST and various studies, none of them look at our new standards. There's not a single study out there that even attempts to ask the question, what does it take to accomplish what we are requiring of every student? And Judge, with all due respect, not the top 8 or 9% that can get into UT, but every student to achieve in our new system. We don't know the answer to that. I think that's where you have to start. You have to define the goal, what it is you're trying to accomplish, and then have an honest conversation about what it's going to take to get there.
And there are also some good indications, David, of school districts today that are much more productive than others.
I would agree, but if you take even the analysis in the past, and you and I can have this conversation, I hope we continue to talk about. If you look at the, if you take existing data, do a regression analysis, not of those who meet minimum passing standards, but of those who meet the commended level.
Right. Well, you have to do that now because it's compressed otherwise.
That is going to produce a very different picture than simply looking at passing data. And I want to say a word about teaching, because everybody in my law firm, we are former teachers, we are the spouses or children of teachers, we believe in teachers. Average high school teacher today in the districts where most of the kids are is going to see 160 to 170 kids a day. Every day. Not once a week, not one class a day, every day, all day. I want you to do the math. Give one assignment that requires some higher order thinking skills to grade. Give one assignment that takes 10 minutes per kid to grade. Just 10 minutes of individualized attention per child. You've just spent about 25 hours outside or in addition to the regular teaching load, grading one assignment that you spend 10 minutes per child on.
You know, with the acceleration of technology, that's where our school system in Texas is not keeping up. And the more technology and acceptance of it, even down to, self-paced learning. So if a student doesn't have to, if a student can master fourth grade, why does he have to sit there for the rest of the year? These are some of the things we'll be looking at.
I do agree with you
on
that.
And we need to change the paradigm because we're spending money on antiquated traditions that haven't been effective without taking advantage. And that's why I've been looking at efficiency and productivity, because instead of supplementing, we need to be supplanting. We need to be making those improvements. And I think we all have ideas on that. And that's something we'll be looking forward to in the next session.
Folks, panelists, we have to shut down. We're a bit over time. I'm sorry. But thank you all for attending the panel.
It's good to see you. Good to be with you today.
Yeah.
And we hope to see you back next year.
Do you have a card?
Sure. Rob, great to
Hey.
see you.